what is the level of concern that you're seeing among the ministers over there meeting in Chantilly, France, about Libra?
Well, it's not just about Libra, it's about the whole concept. There's implications for central banks, there are implications for finance ministers, there are implications for regulators, there are implications for consumer protection, and therefore there is concern, and I think there's the exchange of experiences, exchange of information, exchange of policy recommendations, and then, of course, I think a collective decision that a lot more has to be discussed and known before anything can fly.
One of the questions that we've seen raised back here in the United States in front of Congress, because there's been testimony for 2 days now, specifically on Libra, but it raises the issues you do as well, is will Facebook stop going forward with it, essentially have a moratorium while the regulators catch up? What is the mechanism by which global regulators could get together, coordinate on how to handle cryptocurrency?
Well, first of all, this is not in the calendar before 1 year from now. So we're not talking about something that's going to happen imminently. And second, I think there's going to have to be a lot more consultation, a lot more discussion, a lot more analysis before anything goes forward. So I think there's a lot of work in store. The potential is interesting, is important, but so are the concerns and so are the risks. And they have to be well balanced before anything happens.
One of the things you focus on is growth, global growth among the OECD countries. Could this innovation potentially actually spur more growth? Could it be pro-growth?
The question of growth has been compromised because of the trade tensions. A year ago, we forecast 4% growth. Now we're forecasting 3.2% growth in the case of the OECD in particular, but the IMF is going more or less in the same direction. So there's been we've shaved off 0.7, 0.8% growth, which is massive. This is the GDP of the world, the speed at which the world economy is growing. And one of the reasons is that trade is growing practically towards flat when it was already growing at 5.5% in 2017, and when it should be growing at around 7 to 8%. And it's moving very, very sluggishly. So is investment. Why? Because, well, if you don't know if you are going to be able to sell, then you don't invest, because you only invest when you to produce, and you only produce to sell. And you don't know at what tariff you're going to be able to sell, and therefore you don't invest. And this is what is happening. This is why we have seen this slowdown, mostly because of the trade tensions, which are moving into the territory of investment and creating uncertainty.
Which raises the question of what's to be done about that. One of the responses back in the United States, as you know, is that the chair of our Fed, Jay Powell, has said because of trade uncertainties, we may become more accommodative in our monetary policy. We've seen a dramatic growth in negative yielding debt around the world. Will that in part ameliorate or reverse what you're describing is some of the challenges to growth because of diminishing trade?
Central bankers are heroes, but remember, over the last 10 years in which we've been dealing with a crisis, they brought down the rates to about zero. The Fed was reversing somewhat, but right now has given signals that it may start cutting rates going forward. So basically, what they're doing is, playing by the signals. They're reacting to the signals, to data, which is fine. The only problem is that you now need a fiscal policy to come in. You now need countries that have the fiscal space to come in, stimulate their economies, invest some more. It doesn't mean they're going to lose control of their economies or their deficits or the debt. It's just that there is room in many economies, and they should use it.
One other issue on the agenda that's been set by Mr. Le Maire is the so-called digital tax that France has proposed for digital revenues in France. The United States government has resisted that. In fact, the president's announced that they're going to have an investigation, a trade investigation about the appropriateness of that digital tax. What is the discussion likely to be over there at the G7?
Well, first of all, there is a shared interest that we continue to make progress on the issue. And I say continue because we've already delivered a lot when it comes to international taxation. For example, 47 million bank accounts have been, information about those bank accounts has been exchanged to the countries of origin of the owners of those bank accounts in third countries, worth $5 trillion. This is massive amounts. There's been, a very hard-nosed review of about 250 special, fiscal regimes, and 100 and something more have been either canceled or modified. So there's been a very, very good deliverables on this. Now the question is the taxation of the digital. That is a complex, but there is now a program of work that has been approved since last May, that has been confirmed in Fukuoka and then in Osaka by the leaders of the G20. So there's a very good coordination between the G7 and the G20 on this. And here, clearly, the idea is to continue to work together. There are a number of different approaches, different interpretations, but the most important thing is we've received our marching orders to continue to work with the inclusive framework where 129 countries are participating in order to eventually, by 2020, have a single approach and implementation on a single policy.
And finally, Mr. Secretary General, there's a lot of change going on in the leadership in economic institutions on both sides of the Atlantic. We have a new head of the World Bank. We have a new president of the Commission over in Europe. We're going to have a new head of the IMF. I'm not sure it's within your purview to decide who that's going to be, but based on your vast experience with these issues, do you anticipate the next head of the IMF will be a European?
Well, listen, there are understandings, let's say, over time that have led to the World Bank always appointing an American and the IMF always appointing a European. Now, at some point in time, I'm on the record as having said, listen, it should be based on merit-based, rather than because you belong to a particular region of the world. However, the individuals that have been appointed to lead the World Bank, certainly to lead now the European Commission, and I mean Ursula von der Leyen, but also the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, and the names that are being discussed in the case of the IMF, all are very well qualified. They're impeccable choices. And it's a privilege to have so many well-qualified individuals. But as I mentioned before, in my if I could choose an ideal situation, I would go more for certainly merit-based, regardless of regions or nationalities. But as I said, I think we can sleep tight because. If any of those names that are being talked about today are appointed at the head of the IMF, we'll be in good hands.